And when we are journeying through the Bible in this great adventure, if you're new to our fellowship, just to let you know what's going on, but that we are going through the great adventure, which is reading through the Bible in 3 years. The Bible's kind of a big and intimidating book to some people, and so you approach the Bible like you would eating an elephant. That is one bite at a time. And 3 years is a pace where you can read and meditate and enjoy it. But after 3 years, you'll be able to say, hey, man, I read through the whole Bible. And few Christians ever read through the whole Bible. And yet this is definitely our manual for life. And this week's reading, our preaching goes with the reading, was the last chapter of Esther, chapter 10, and then the first 6 chapters of the book of Job. So our message comes from Job chapter 1. Would you turn in your Bibles to Job chapter 1 as we look at our message, The Perfect Storm? Those who study weather patterns say that there's a 100-year mark when it comes to storms, meaning that all the perfect storm or atmospheric conditions come together about once every century to have a massive snowstorm or a rainstorm or a hurricane or a tornado season, whatever that is. And all those things have to just be in perfect place to bring that perfect storm. Well, in a spiritual sense, as we look at this trial that hits the man Job's life, he goes through a perfect storm. Everything is perfect to see somebody go through the most difficult thing that I've ever read recorded in history in such a compact time in their life. And as we see this unfold for us, we're going to see our own hearts revealed. Because ultimately in this challenge, this battleground over the soul of a man between the Lord's plan for him to glorify him and worship him and honor him, and Satan's plan for him to curse God to his face. Do you know when you go through trials, ultimately as satanic attacks come into your life, Satan's ultimate goal is for you to get angry at God and curse God to his face. And sadly, some of us have succumbed to that experience in life. And for some of us, we've never been pushed to that brink before. But before us is an awesome lesson of life to watch a man that hangs on to the Lord through it all, through the thick and thin of what's in front of him. Let's read the first 5 verses as we begin. Here in Job chapter 1, it says, "There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and shunned evil. And 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. Also his possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. And his sons would go and feast in their houses, each on his appointed day, and would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So it was, when the days of feasting had run their course, that Job would send and sanctify them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, 'It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts.' Thus Job did regularly." The first 5 verses tells us about this man, and it's a beautiful picture of a blessed man and a blessed life and God's hand all over this guy. We first see that Job lives in the land of Uz. We're not sure where Uz was, but Uz was in the Middle East. It is the oldest book of all the Bible as far as the writing of it. Obviously, it's not older than the account of Genesis that has to do with creation, but as far as a written document, it is thought by theologians to be the oldest manuscript that we have in the Scriptures. In this book, there's no mention of the law, no mention of Abraham or Isaac or Jacob. Here's a guy that has a love relationship with the God of the universe in a very unique way. And as we see his life unfold, we see his character in verse 1. It says he was blameless, upright, one who feared God and shunned evil. It gives us 4 descriptives of this man. These are not his own descriptives. These are not his neighbor's descriptives. This is the descriptive of God himself. God who sees our thoughts, our hearts, our lives, our actions when nobody else is looking, says of this man, Job, he is blameless. That doesn't mean he's perfect. He's a fallen sinner just like you and I. But there was no obvious glaring sin in his life. He was upright, a man of character. And notice the last two. They're really bookends, if you will, of a godly life. He feared God and he shunned evil. You see, when you have a high reverence for God and a love for God and a fear of the Lord, a healthy dose of the fear of the Lord, you want to shun evil. You want to turn away from any kind of sin that is obvious to you. And when people begin to live in a blatant, open, sinful lifestyle, they have lost the fear of the Lord. They have lost the reverence for God. But Job had that basically a bucket load of the fear of the Lord to shun evil. It also tells us that he has children. He has 10 children in verse 2, 7 sons and 3 daughters. Now, you won't meet a lot of families that have 10 kids. We had a family here at the earlier service. They have 10 children, and I met the 3 youngest of those 3 children. And so they had 10 kids. I can't imagine what kind of ruckusy household that would be with 10 kids. I was the youngest of 4, and it seemed like we were a tornado on wheels, man, everywhere we went. A store manager one day came up to my mother and said, "Would you please get your children and leave our store?" So that was kind of our family dynamic. Imagine 7 boys and 3 girls, and then his wealth is measured in possessions. Today, we measure wealth in dollar signs. Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, both billionaires, are the 2 richest men in the United States of America. We measure those things in dollar signs. But in ancient times, you talked about the cattle. You talked about all of their resources. Notice this. He has 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen. A yoke is 2 oxen, so there's actually 1,000 oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household. If you showed up in this whole picture scene, this large rural setting, pastures and sheep and oxen and servants going everywhere, and probably vineyards and olive groves and all the things that they can grow in the Middle East. This guy has a sprawling spread in the Middle East to handle and to support all of this livestock, and his reputation was known by all. It says at the end of verse 3, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. Have you noticed that almost every community, especially if it's smaller, the person that is the wealthiest person in the community, you might not know them personally, but you know their name or their business or their farm or whatever it is. And he was the who's who of the land of the East. There was nobody as prosperous as this man. But it goes further than that, because verse 4 tells us about his family dynamic. It seems to be a family of love and joy and peace, because there's a lot of wealthy people. There's a lot of big families that are fractured and disjointed and hateful and greedy and all those things. But it says in verse 4, and his sons would go and feast in their houses, each on his appointed day, and would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. They had a consistent, regular schedule. It says the appointed day. We're not sure if that meant when each one of them had a birthday party, they hosted it, and all the family came. Imagine 10 kids, 10 siblings. They're all grown. They've got wives. They've got children. Imagine just the joy of kind of every month or every couple of weeks, depending on what their appointed day was. It doesn't give us. They're having a family reunion, a little mini family reunion. And when you have a disjointed, broken family, you don't do stuff like that. You know, they're not invited. We won't come anymore. But they're all gathering together. And this is because this guy is a godly guy and has raised his family in the fear of the Lord. And lastly, in verse 5, we see his spiritual life. Job would think to himself, after his grown children and all of them, they were together, he thought, maybe they're there and they're having a celebration and they're drinking and they're partying a little bit, and maybe one of them cursed God in his heart. And so he would wake up the day after the appointed feast, wake up early, and he would offer a burnt offering, a sacrifice, Old Testament style, to intercede and offer the blood that was shed to cover the sins of his children, and to pray to the God of heaven that his children would be forgiven. You see, every spiritual dad or spiritual mom, the thing that is closest to their heart is that their children would know God, that they would walk with God, that your grandchildren would know the Lord. And this was Job's desire. So he's interceding. Every man of God, every woman of God worth their salt is praying for their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren and their family. They're interceding. That's who Job is. The first 5 verses, you can almost feel it leap off the page, can't you? I mean, as you're hearing this and you're picturing it in your mind, all the cattle in the pasture land, you can almost feel the sunshine. It's bright and the grass is green and the birds are chirping and singing. There's blessing everywhere. You just want to break out in song. Oh, happy day. There's something about the joy of this scene in these first days. Whoa, I want to live there. I want to be a part of Job's household, right? But now the scene changes. We go from this scene of just total family, business, rural blessing on the life of this man Job, and the camera turns and God pulls back the curtain of heaven itself, and you look into a conversation and a challenge that has taken place at the same time. Realize this is not a fictional story. This is a real story of what's happening behind the scenes, and this is what's happening in your life and my life as well. There is a spiritual battle, and the battleground is the hearts of men and women, so that they would trust God with all their hearts. Or as we'll see, Satan's claim and desire is that people, as he brings adversity into their life, that they would get mad at God, angry with God, resentful at God, bitter towards God, till they finally curse God to his face. Look at it as we pick it up in verse 6 through 12. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil." So Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now, stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. This is a crazy scene that brings all kinds of theology to the forefront. And that is that though Satan was an anointed cherub, that because of his sin, recorded in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, he lost his position in heaven. And he took a third, according to Revelation chapter 12, he took a third of the angelic hosts with him in his rebellion. And they became Satan, the devil, and the demonic forces, these angelic creatures. But it appears, though he lost his position, Satan still comes in and out of the presence of God, as we see in this story. The angels came in, and he came in with them. And the Lord looks at him and just addresses him specifically. "Hey, where'd you come from?" Now, the Lord knows everything. He knows where he came from, but it's all for our benefit. He goes, "Well, walking to and fro throughout the earth." Now, Peter tells us that the devil is a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. He's walking all over planet Earth. He wants to kill, steal, and destroy. He wants to ruin your life. He wants to get you in the bondage of sin. He wants you to live a miserable existence and end up in hell. That's what his goal is. Satan never has a good day. If you're having a down day, it's not like the demonic creatures, he's having a bad enough day anyway. No, they're like, "Hey, dogpile on that. Let's turn them further away from God." And as all of these things begin to unfold in this pulling back of the spiritual curtain that the Lord gives us this view of, the Lord now begins to boast and brag on his boy Job. Now, if you're a parent, you've done that. If you're a grandparent, you've done that in an insane way, because grandparents begin to lose their minds. Their child is the smartest and the brightest and the most clever and has more ability and better looking. And it's always fascinating because it's amazing that this brilliant child could come from my son-in-law, the idiot. kind of. And yet there's this celebration. Really, the Lord's looking at Satan and go, "Hey, have you ever considered my servant Job?" Man, and notice this is his evaluation of him. This is his appraisal. He's upright, he's blameless, he's upright, he fears God, he shuns evil. Those 4 things. And in this, as the dialogue goes back and forth, it almost makes you feel like, doesn't it? If you ever have a good week or a good month and the Lord's proud of you, would you rather him not mention your name to Satan? Right? Lord, if you're ever proud of me, could you just not talk about that, you know? Could I just get an attaboy and leave the devil out of it? But that's what's happening here. The Lord said, hey, have you considered him? And it means to evaluate somebody like a military soldier would. He goes, oh, yeah. Can you see Satan? I've been wanting to take him out forever. But notice what it says in verse 9. He says, does Job fear God for nothing? Satan's accusation about Job is that he only serves God because God's blessed him. And can I say that that's true of a lot of folks? There are a lot of people that only want blessings from God. They really don't want a relationship with God. It wasn't true of Job, but that was the accusation. Do you know that the Bible tells us in Revelation chapter 12 that the accuser of the brethren, Satan, he accuses us before God's throne day and night, making false accusations, true accusations, and everything in between to God about you and about me. And here he says, you know what? You know why Job serves you, God? Now, this whole thing, I mean, if you're the God of the universe, I would just say, why don't you snuff out this mouthy devil, right? He's talking trash in heaven. Some people make the mistake, even in this story, they think that God and the devil are equals. They are not. Because, you know, if I go through a list, just help me out for a second. If I say an obvious, then you say the opposite, okay? If I say up, you say. If I say black, you say. If I say right, you say. Right? If I say God, right? That is our knee-jerk or inclination when we think of spiritual warfare. But when I say God, truly from a theological, biblical perspective, you would say nothing. Because there's nothing equal to God. Satan is a fallen angel. He is not a fallen deity. And so it's really important to understand that. If God be for us, who can be against us? Greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world. We have a greater authority going on in our life. Therefore, you see, why could not Satan get to him? Because God, the superior being in power, had put a hedge of protection. Now, when you think of the hedge of protection, look what he says in verse 10. Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? Notice how all encompassing in totality the devil had observed. He said, you put a hedge around him, you put a hedge around his household, and everything that he has on every side. I can't get to the guy. Now that's good news. You know the Lord has a hedge around you? You're pretty excited about that? I'm pretty excited about that. What I'm really bummed out about is he's going to lower the hedge. No! But I like the hedge, right? I like the hedge around me. And that's what Job had. And that's what Satan said. I can't get to him. And he says, ultimately, you've blessed the work of his hands, you've blessed his possessions, but if you, this is Satan's challenge, this is his accusation about Job, and it's the same kind of accusation he's accusing you of. You let me touch him, all his possessions, all of his wealth, all of his sheep, all of his cattle, all of his camels, all of his donkeys, all of his wealth. You let me basically take his net worth of all of his finances, and you let me empty his bank account, and he will look up to heaven and he will curse you to your face. If you lost everything in one day, your retirement's gone. You lost the house. You lost the job. You lost everything. Satan's accusation against you and against me is that we only serve God for the blessings that he brings. We don't serve him because we love him. And so he says, you know what? You let me touch his stuff. And notice what God does now, because he's going to let the hedge be lowered so that Satan can get to him. But notice how he limits it. He says in verse 12, behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not lay a hand on his person. Satan can never, ever, ever touch you or me as a child of God unless God gives him permission. That means when I experience the adversities and the trials and what I feel like are spiritual attacks in my life, though they may seem from a physical type of experience, that ultimately I know none of it could get to me unless God allowed it. Now, God didn't do it, but God allowed it. Because we have an enemy of our soul, Satan. People go through life blaming God for wrong that he has not done. Satan's done it. And yes, if you're a child of God, God's allowed it. But God allows it for a meaning and a purpose that he's going to produce. And so now we see this unfold. So we went from the beautiful picture of love, joy, and peace of Job's life now to this heavenly challenge between the enemy of our soul, Satan, and God himself. And God believes in his servant Job, and Satan is convinced if he wipes him out. Now, I said it had to be a perfect storm. You see, everything has to be in the right place. Specifically, all of Job's children, it has to be on one of the days where there's an appointed feast and they're all under one roof. Now, I'm going to read this rather briskly so you get the feeling of these four waves that come crashing down on Job. Imagine you're in his shoes and you get this news, then this news, then this news, then this news, before the other servants even done telling the former. In all of modern history, in all of ancient history, I have never read anything that equates to something with this kind of impact about one man and the tragedy of his life. It says in verse 13, "Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And a messenger came to Job and said, 'The oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them when the Sabeans raided them and took them away. Indeed, they have killed the servants of your servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you.' While he was still speaking, another also came and said, 'The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you.' While he was still speaking, another also came and said, 'The Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels, and took them away. Yes, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you.' While he was still speaking, another also came and said, 'Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And suddenly a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you.'" Have you ever heard of such a thing? This is real life. This is a real life story. Don't you know that this would be on Fox News? This would be on CNN. I mean, they would send Anderson Cooper out there for a special report on the tragedy of this man's life. It would be headline news. And yet, as we see these things unfold, we realize, because we just saw the conversation that took place in heaven. Who didn't hear that conversation? Job. He doesn't know what's happening to his life. He didn't know this was coming. This is the mistake people make when they read the Bible and they see all this stuff. They just kind of, you're detached. You're like, "Oh, yeah, story of Job." No, you have to get into the story if you ever want to enjoy the Bible. You got to get into the story and picture that you're Job, but you don't know the conversation and the challenge and that Satan wants to take your head off, and you don't realize that this incredible hedge has kept him away from you all this time, but now all the disaster falls upon him in one day, not 1 week, not 1 month, not 1 year, not over the last decade I've had some hardship. One day. One day. Now, you and I just sincerely believe that every Christian that is a child of God, there's going to be a couple, maybe even a handful of times and seasons in an entire life of 70 years where you experience these kinds of things. Not to this degree. But when trials come and they seem to be rapid. But most of us just deal with the pesky inconveniences of life, right? Every time I read Job, I say, I've never had a trial in my life. Because in comparison, it puts everything into perspective, doesn't it? And as I look at this, even though it says the oxen and the donkeys were stolen by the Sabeans, they killed all the servants. It tells us in verse 16 that the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up all the sheep and the servants. Now, was it the fire of God? No, it was Satan brought it, right? God didn't bring it. God's blamed for all kinds of stuff that Satan does. Do you know, even in your insurance policy, there's the act of God provision, right? If there's an earthquake or there's some storm that you can't, he could get no insurance policy for this. Nothing, there's nothing going to cover this. But it wasn't an act of God. But they called it the fire of God. Lightning comes, destroys the 7,000 sheep and those servants. And then the Chaldeans steal the camels. And then the wind hits the house across the wilderness and it collapses, which is the worst tragedy. I mean, you lose this. I mean, literally, he lost all his net worth in one day, right? Because it is stock. This is truly a stock market crash, right? Pun intended, right? Everything's gone. Everything's wiped out. How many of you lost, don't raise your hand, how many of you lost big money in '08 when everything crashed? Most people's net worth was reduced by 50% in that period of time from the housing market bubble that burst, right? And so here's a guy that loses everything, but nothing in comparison to losing your 10 kids. I've been a pastor going on, this is my 27th year, and I have never watched people as devastated as when they lose one child. Even 20 years after the fact, when they talk to you, there's such a rawness and a tender. It's like something that never fully heals. And I can't imagine losing 10 kids all at once. Now, realize these are all grown kids. No doubt they're all married, and they all have kids, grandkids. This is a house full of kids, grandkids, aunts, uncles. It's a household of people that have died now. And then I have some little trials here and there. Little pesky ones. You know, just even over the last month, Tammy and I, just the little pesky things, and that's more of a normal thing. We kind of look at our own life. 2 weeks, about 10 days before Easter, I got this abscess in my front tooth. And so Dennis told me, tried antibiotics, and he's like, hey, we got to pull that tooth. Now, I've never had a tooth pulled. I'm not really excited about that. And let alone, it's my front tooth. And so I've got this abscess the size of a marble, and so there's you feel like you have a fever because of the infection, and I was on antibiotics, and I'm like, it's before Easter, everything always seems to go wrong, and especially when it has to do with my mouth, because what's God called me to do? To speak for Him. And I thought it was just, I took it in stride, so they pulled this tooth, and then because I'm going to have an implant, there's like an 8-month thing, and then they put this they call it a flipper, but basically it's like putting a retainer in your mouth and trying to talk. So the first week I'm like, sure, and I feel like I'm talking like Yosemite Sam, and yet I know that the congregation would rather me wear this flipper right now and not be your toothless pastor, because it's a little terrifying. Right? You don't want that. I told my wife I was going to do that. She said, don't do that. Don't do that. Somebody is impressed. Pastor, you did that with no hands. I am so talented. But the funny thing is that as you go through these things, I mean, it takes time to get used to. You ever have something happen in your mouth and your tongue's raw and you got all this stuff going on and going into Easter, and then we're so excited. We prayed for months to go on our 30th anniversary. We're going to be away a week for every decade, and we're so excited. And Tam and I are at the gym the day before we leave exercising, and Tam hurts her back. So much so she can hardly walk the next day. So I'm basically like lifting her into the car to take off. And that's not what we really had planned, was a convalescent kind of anniversary. And so the first week she was really down. We couldn't do very much stuff. And because I drove her around on drives and different things, I was flipping a Yui one day, and I was turning in our car, and I mean, it was like a half curb. It wasn't even a total curb, but her car has low-profile tires, and I hit this half curb about 15 miles an hour and blew out the sidewall. And so we're a couple of days into our anniversary. My wife can't walk in the car, and I'm covered with black all over me because I'm changing the tire, and they give you the mini wheel. You know, don't drive over 120 miles, not over 50 miles an hour, and these things. And it's Phoenix, right? So it's 90 degrees, and I'm out there. And so just the normal stuff that goes on with life. And everything, it was a great time, and we're coming back, and I'm getting gas in Utah before I finally arrive home. And I'm sitting there, and I'm washing the windshield, and I'm grumbling to myself because the squeegee was shot, so it's like leaving 4 streaks. The more I streak, the more I try to squeegee off it, and I'm going, man, they need to replace their equipment, and what's their problem? Fine. And I was a little frustrated, and I go, fine, I'm going to get another one. And I was pumping gas in my car, and so I had the hose across there, and I went to step over, but I was kind of going aggressive because I was going to fix this thing, and I caught my toe. Now, I didn't stumble. I didn't fall. I body slammed to the ground. And it was so embarrassing. You're at the gas station. There's a guy pumping gas right behind me, and he's got his back. I know out of respect, he did not turn around and laugh. You could not miss the slap of my body and the air that left my body. And when I hit, out of all the area, at gas stations, they're covered with dirt and oil. So now I get up and I'm covered with dirt and oil all the way up my side. But out of all this area, there's one piece of plastic that had come off a car, and it was there as a platform, and it had this sharp piece of plastic. And I crammed my hand down on it, and I thought I broke my finger, and it gouged into my finger. And so I get up. Now, Tammy's only been in the gas station to use the bathroom for 5 minutes. She comes out. She comes out. I'm covered with dirt and oil down the side. My hand, blood is running down my hand. I'm holding it like it's broke. I'm stunned. My knee is killing me, and I'm washing the windshield. She comes out, and her eyes get really big because she sees me, and then she said, I left you for 5 minutes. What happened to you? Looks like you got run over by a train or something. What happened to you? I said, I caught my toe on the hose. And, I don't know if I broke this, but it's blood. And we went in and had to get the convenience store to let us use their first aid kit, and peroxide, So I drove the rest of 200 miles home with my hand. But, just little things, having your tooth pulled, a little back injury, having an embarrassed moment on the gas station. When I read this story, people ask, how was your vacation? I said, it was perfect. Right? In comparison, there's nothing like what we're reading here. You and I deal with smaller things, but even in the smaller things, people's hearts can get twisted. And the enemy's desire is to get you to look at the adversity of your life and curse God to his face. You see, what is Job's reaction? Look at it in verse 20 through 22. Then Job rose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell on the ground and cursed God to his face. No, he worshiped. Verse 21, and he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong. Can you imagine this? When everything went wrong, what did he do? He turned to God and worshiped. He worshiped. And he acknowledged the powerful truth. He said, the Lord has given and blessed my life, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be his name. This is an important theological truth he shares in chapter 1 and chapter 2. And if you don't get a hold of this when adversities in your life come, you are not going to stand well. You're not going to stand well. So Satan thinks that he's got to up the ante. He's got to change the stakes. So we go from this tragedy, and here is Job worshiping God, not cursing God. And now the camera pans back, and the curtain is pulled back in heaven, and we see the next conversation in verse 1. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, from where do you come? So Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth and walking back and forth. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil, and still he holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause. So Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin, yes, all that a man has, he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took for himself a potsherd, or a piece of pottery, with which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of the ashes. Satan comes again. How long has it been? We're not sure. Has it been days? Has it been weeks? Has it been a month? Is it the very next day? We're not sure. We don't know what kind of time elapsed, but what we do know is that when he came this time, the Lord asked him the same thing and said, Job still is serving me. He holds on to his integrity, even though you have tried to turn his heart against me. And Job now changes his tactic. He realized just touching his possessions, just touching his wealth, just touching the outer things, because God put that limitation on him. Remember, he could touch his possession, but he couldn't touch his person. And so now he says, okay, skin for skin, all that a man has, he'll give for his life. Self-preservation is the strongest drive you have. And when you think about getting sick or getting cancer or shriveling up and dying from some kind of disease, it is the most terrifying thing that most humans will ever go through in their entire life. And so he says, now, you just let me touch his body. Let me make him so sick. And so the Lord, once again, pulls the hedge down further, and he gives him limitation. He says, okay, you can touch his body, you can make him sick, but you cannot take his life. And so he says, this will do it. He gives him boils from the top of his head to the sole of his foot. Now, boils, you don't see a lot of boils in modern day, right? Because of medicine and different things. But boils are basically a huge zit, right? They get red and inflamed, and they are so tender to the touch. Oftentimes, they lance them to try to drain the pressure that's there. And imagine he's covered with boils from the top of his head all the way to the sole of his foot. And he takes a piece of pottery. He's sitting in ashes as he's grieving, and he's sitting there scraping himself. These boils ooze. They have pus that comes out of them, and they might itch. We're not sure why he's scraping himself, but it itches, and so he's got a piece of pottery, and it's all over his body. Some people could lose all of their possessions and still love God, but you let them get sick. You let them have the back injury. You let them get cancer. You let them get some kind of disease. You let them go through a time of physical debilitation, and that is the button that turns their heart angry towards God, especially if it says it's painful boils. It is painful. I don't know, my grandma was from Oklahoma, and so when a sore looked really bad, she'd call it, oh, that sore looks so angry. I'm not sure, you ever hear that terminology? That's an angry sore. I'm like, is it going to jump off your body and punch me? What do you mean it's angry? It's so inflamed and so red, it just looks so painful and so angry. And he's covered with this. And yet Job, he doesn't curse God. Now, maybe you've noticed, especially if you're new to the Bible, maybe you were asking the question, well, Job's 10 children are all dead, all of his possessions are dead, but where's Mrs. Job, his sweet, encouraging honey? Well, we look at her now. It says in verse 9, then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. So, oh, honey, thanks. Over the breakfast table, she gives him a bowl of oatmeal and says, why don't you just curse God and die? You boil-infested maggot. Now, we have a little giggle at the expense of Mrs. Job. There is a reason Satan left her behind, because she's useful. Because remember when Job's children got together in chapter 1, after the feast, what was Job's concern? That they had cursed God in their heart. And so he interceded for him. Satan, when he shows up and before God, he says, he'll curse you to your face. When the loss of possessions didn't work, he comes again and said, he'll curse you to your face if you touch his body. And now what words are his wife using? Why don't you curse God and die? Do you know that there are times, husbands and wives, as we're going through difficulties, that you can be an instrument in the hand of Satan to bring greater discouragement to your husband or your wife? Do you realize that? She is in this place. Now, over the years, having been married for 30 years, and hearing my wife's take on this interpretation, it softens my view, all kidding aside, about this precious woman. Realize that the three main things in her life are all gone. Her relationship with her husband, that they've had 10 kids, his life now is devastated with this physical disease of boils from the top of his head to the sole of his foot. When you're in pain and that kind of suffering, he can be no help to her. Her children, 10 children, maybe grandchildren. Can you imagine the sorrow of a mom? The bitterness and the anguish of the loss of 10 kids. And all the financial securities, all gone. We're now flat broke. We have no money. All our children are dead. And now my husband's health is toast. And in this moment, this was for her, this was her breaking point. I believe most of us have a breaking point. It doesn't appear that Job really breaks, but he does get rebuked at the end of this book because he does say some things that are out of line about God. But he doesn't really break. Each one of us in our life, there are experiences that can set us off. When I was just a young Christian, I had just came to Christ in February of 1984. In September of that year, after walking with the Lord for 7 months, I had really no strong foundation in the Lord. I had just begun to read the Bible. I really didn't have good reasoning capacities because I was so young in the faith. And we were rodeo cowboys. I'm a bull rider, and my brother's a bull rider. And so my goal through the summer and spring and summer was to make it to the Idaho Cowboys Association finals, make the top 15 in bull riding, and go to the finals. And so I had done that, and I had drawn my 2 bulls that I was going to go to the finals. So I went to the practice pen a couple of days before the finals just to ride and be tuned up, and I got on this bull. And I came off the bull, and as I landed on the ground, this bull was kind of a Charolais bull, and he got his rear end, and I knew I was getting ready to get kicked in the face or something, but he kicked me in the thigh, and he snapped my femur right above my knee. And so I broke my leg, and my very gentle cowboy friends put me on a barn door filled with nails and took me to the hospital to get me fixed up. But there I was in a body cast. And it's very humbling being in a body cast because actually you have to use a bedpan. I was 19 years old. My cousin ended up going and getting on the bulls that I had drawn, which were good ones. And as I sat there in that body cast in my bed in the living room of my house, I just got mad at God. And I began to talk to God, and I said, I just gave my life to you, and this is the way you treat people. And I just had this misconception that if you give your life to God, then nothing bad ever happens in your life again. I had this misconception. It's not true. But because that was my thought, my opinion, when bad things happen, I felt, God, you let me down. God, where was your hedge of protection for me? Where was your hand? I surrendered my life. And I said, fine, God, if that's the way you're going to treat me. And I just got mad, and I said, I'm just going to go back in the world. And so for the next 3 months, I just went back into my old life of sin because I was angry at God. I basically kind of shook my fist, though I physically never, in my heart, I was just angry about the situation because I had no foundation. Job is not that way. Job's been walking with God for many, many years. And when his wife tells him to curse God and die, and Satan is tempting him to curse God and die, and when all the circumstances absolutely say that they are against him, that he should curse God and die, what does he say in verse 10? But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. You see, he said earlier, God has given, God has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. God gives in your life, and God takes away in your life. And now he has to tell his wife in a more personal way. He says, you know what, honey? You don't want to talk like a foolish person like me at the age of 19 that was unwilling to take the adversity that God allowed. Realize Satan brought the adversity, God lowered the hedge, and every single one of us are going to go through seasons in this battle, this thing called life, where we experience that. We're going to experience God's blessing and protection, and then there are times that the Lord lowers that hedge, and it all is a test for the battleground of your heart about your faith. And Job here doesn't curse God. He says, honey, you know what? We have accepted good. Now, isn't this just great logic? It's good theology. God has blessed us. God has been good. And if you're here this morning, most of you have experienced the goodness of God, and you've come to worship the Lord, and you realize that he's good. That's why you're in the house of the Lord. God is good. But you also are going to experience adversity, even though you are a child of God. And when that adversity comes, you need to embrace it and throw your arms around it with a big hug, just the way you did the goodness. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but my human nature, I want to be a member of the Bless Me Club. I want nothing to do with the Adversity Club. How about you? I just want goodness and blessing and love and joy and peace and prosperity and all these different, that's what I want. But when adversity comes, I don't want anything to do with that. But is that mature thinking, right? If my wife and I would have let the pesky little things that happened in our 3-week period of time ruin our time. One day we were only there like maybe 2 days, and Tammy, because she couldn't walk and her back hurt so much, I was going to the little gym where we were to exercise for about an hour a day. And I was going out the door, and Tam just looked so sad, and she looked so depressed. And she said, "You're going, and here I am sitting on the couch." And I said, "I'll be back in an hour, honey." And I came back, but when I came back, her countenance had totally changed. And she said, "I've just been here praying and talking to the Lord and reading the Bible." And she said, "The Lord just reminded me of this wonderful verse here in Proverbs chapter 15 that says, 'He who has a merry heart has a continual feast.' If I decide in my heart that I'm going to have a merry heart, it's going to be like a feast." And so I've just chosen. I'm just going to trust God with our circumstances, and we're just going to be filled with joy no matter what's going on. And so that was our theme verse through all of our stuff. I was going down the road with my hand, I thought I was, "Well, honey, a merry heart's like a continual feast." But 90% of life is your perspective. And so when you have the perspective that you can trust God and you will receive the goodness and blessing of God, but you are not going to escape adversity. I don't care if you're young, old, male, female, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, dark-haired, brown, it doesn't matter. You are going to experience adversity. What do you do with that adversity? As we close this service here today, I know that there are a handful of people in this room that bitterness and resentment and anger has taken root in your heart about some circumstances, either financial reversals, problems with relationships, that wife walked out, you lost that job, you lost that house, or a physical issue that you've been diagnosed with cancer. In all of these things, I don't know what it is that will push the button of your soul to make you curse God. When Jesus warned Peter the night before his crucifixion, he said, "Peter, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you, and when you return to me after your big blunder, then strengthen the brethren." That had to be one of the most terrifying things Jesus could say to Peter, don't you think? If Jesus looked at me and said, "Rick, Satan's been asking for you by name." Well, tell him I'm not home. Tell him I don't want anything to do with it. But it was the same kind of Job experience. And what did Peter do? He denied the Lord 3 times, and the last time with what? A curse. He said he cursed the last time. You see, the temptation for Peter was the same, and he went out and wept bitterly. He knew he blew it when the rooster crowed. But the rooster has crowed for some of us, and we've realized our heart is in a bad place. And Satan has assaulted you in the heavenly scene and said, if I do this to this person, this man, this woman, this couple, this family, if I do this, they're going to curse you to your face, God. And he's made some headway with some of us, just as he did with me as a young man. Ever since that time, I have never turned that direction again after having learned my lesson. And so may we learn the lesson that Job teaches us. Let's pray. Father, we just ask that your Spirit and your grace would move and minister to our hearts and lives right now. Lord, we just confess we need you. And Lord, I pray that your Spirit would just draw and minister those hearts that are broken, those hearts that are hurting, those hearts that have went through wave after wave after wave, and they sit here today just devastated, broken, empty, angry, resentful. And Lord, you want to set them free. Lord, you've brought them here for such a time as this. You've brought them here to hear the word of the Lord, through the power of the Spirit of the Lord, to give them a heart for the Lord. So we're just in an attitude of prayer right now. If there's some bitterness and resentment in your attitude, if you've been mad at God and you just need to let go of some things, I just want to invite you. You and I want to pray together. I've been there. I've been in those shoes. I know what that feels like. And so I'm just going to invite you right now. Just stand up right where you're at, and you and I are going to pray together. We don't know what the issues are. It doesn't matter what's going on in your life, but God knows. But I want to give you the opportunity not to leave here today without surrendering. God bless you guys. Anybody else? We're going to pray together in just a moment. But as the Lord's knocking on the door of your heart, leave here a different man or a different woman than you came in. Leave here with his love, joy, and peace rather than that angry, edgy resentment that the enemy has been getting a foothold in your life. Just stand up right where you're at. We're going to pray. God bless you guys all over the room. Those who are standing, just pray with me right now. Let's just pour our hearts out to the Lord. Just repeat after me. Join with me. Open your heart by faith. Lord Jesus, please forgive me for my anger, my resentment. my bitterness over these circumstances. I just confess my heart has grown hard. The joy is gone. And I ask that you would restore to me, Lord, the joy of your salvation. I trust you, Jesus. I trust you with these issues, that you will work them together for good, according to your plan, according to your timing. So refresh me, Lord. Strengthen me in your love. Help me grow in faith. Help me be filled with hope in your plan for me. Help me embrace the good that comes and the adversity that comes by faith, trusting you. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.